Okay, guys, let's get to our first lecture of the day on AI in agriculture. Can you all please join your hands together for Dr. Dilli Paudel? So, sir is the postdoctoral researcher at Wageningen University and Research, and he's also the software engineer at Alpine Labs.
Thank you, Jatin. Good morning. Namaste. I'm still recovering from my cold, so hopefully you can still hear and understand me what I'm saying, right? Okay, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this wonderful opportunity to share whatever I was doing in Wageningen about agriculture and the applications of AI to it. And then in the introduction, so there were two titles written there. At the moment, I'm neither of those, okay? So I'm not in Wageningen, I'm not a postdoc. I'm also not a software engineer in Alpine Labs yet. That will happen only next week. But anyway, let's move on. Okay, so today we will talk about, based on my experience in Wageningen, what are the trends in AI for agriculture, AI in agriculture, AI for agriculture, and then what the work that our team was doing, as well as what are the, let's say, promising directions of research for future. Here's the outline. Because outside when we were tea talk, I was being asked how I got here, and then journey is hopefully a bit interesting for you also. So I will go through that first, and then the AI revolution, the second one. I'm sure everybody here kind of knows what is happening. I will just briefly touch on that, and then the third one is for AI for agriculture. That's the kind of meat of the talk, and finally, what are the areas of research in AI for agriculture? Okay, let's start with this. Okay, so I've shown 4 different places I've been before I got here, so I will go through each of them little by little. Also, it's also kind of a motivation for why I got into this field and why I got here, right? So first, I was born in Baglung, and then on the right side, it seems the pictures are not super clear, but anyway, that's where it's basically mountains or hills of Nepal. Okay, thank you. In the lower right picture, you can see my family working in the farm in the mountain areas. This is technically not Baglung, this actually is Pokhara. But anyway, you got the idea. There are your families in mountains of Nepal. They work manually, they work in fields. And almost everything they do is human labor, right? So most of you kind of should be familiar with this. So I saw this growing up. So my mom raised us doing this kind of labor. And then I went to a very pretty good school, so that's the next thing that I will talk about. So this is where I went to for my high school, middle school, high school. And then this is a whole different world for someone coming from a village in let's say western Nepal, mountainous areas, right? And then this school, the education I got there kind of helped me get to the next place, which is San Francisco, California. So that's Stanford University, and then that's where I got my bachelor's and master's. And of course, I didn't study agriculture there. I studied computer science. I learned about data, AI, machine learning. I learned about security, and then at some point, I mean, if any of you are going to the US or abroad, you will constantly face this issue of your family in Nepal. They might still be in need of financial support, right? So you need to provide some support to them. So that's how I just kept going. Based on the field I studied, I started a job in San Francisco Bay Area in software development. And I had some internships, but the main job was at Oracle on network security, and later it was more database security. So it's a distributed application for securing database encryption keys. So that's where I was until 2019, the beginning of 2019. Now, while I was in that place, so I was basically thinking, okay, now I know how software works. I know how databases work. Can I take this and go to Nepal and then do something in my village? And I realized not really. That's maybe now there are also software companies in Nepal with some of their offices in the US, similar to the one that I will be working on from next week. But then it was not the case. So I felt that I need to know a little bit more about what is happening in the field that's directly relevant to my family and my community, right? So that's That's the reason why I decided to go to Wageningen. So Wageningen is it's one of the top universities in the field of food systems and agriculture. And then until I decided to do a PhD, that was like in June, July 2018, I had no clue. I had no information about much of Netherlands. Forget about Wageningen. I didn't know the university. In June, I started looking for it. In July, I applied for it. In September, I had accepted an offer. It was that quick. And then the lower right picture, you can see my PhD supervision team. I finished my PhD last year in June. And then after that, I was still working in Wageningen as a postdoc. The goal was to, okay, so I have finished a PhD. I could go back to software development. But then, is there a path through research that I could also take what I have learned and then take it all the way to the mountainous areas of Nepal? So I was exploring a few options to see if research itself could bring the impact to the people in the mountain areas. And based on what you know, I'm actually not going to continue in research. So I didn't see a very clear path through that. So I decided that I'm going to do something on my own, separate from research. So that's why the number 5 is missing from the map. But anyway, we'll talk about that at the end if there's time. Okay, with that, so let's move on to the AI revolution. So this is not completely new to most of you. So you know very well, this year, there were 2 Nobel Prizes for AI-related things. So one of them being the major contributors to machine learning. They were awarded Nobel Prize. Similarly, there was also Nobel Prize awarded to, I think it was AlphaFold, right? So the one that predicts the protein structure, right? So this is the kind of, let's say, frontier of AI, and then this is also being recognized. People are realizing that AI is going to be commonplace in our daily life, and then I think most of us now are used to ChatGPT and other tools that use AI. And then I would like to acknowledge my supervisor for the slide. Now, traditionally, the AI research, AI revolution has been it is taking place in 2 major areas. So one of them being natural language processing, being able to understand, being able to process, being able to kind of generate text or the sequence of text that basically mimic our natural language. So, and here there's a brief outline of how things happened. I'm not going to go into that detail. So basically, natural language processing is one of the fields where AI has taken off, and then ChatGPT is one example of that. Similarly, with LLMs and all of that, so it is likely that there will be a similar transformers kind of, and then LLM kind of revolution in vision, computer vision, right? So with images. So this is from Andrew Ng from Stanford. So you can see that it is expected that there will be a similar revolution in vision. And then the major talk in almost all fields now is about something called foundation models. In case you don't know what foundation models is, this is training a model with large amounts of unlabeled data, and then you fine-tune it for a specific task, a range of tasks. So the model can do answering questions. The model can do things like basically language-related things like summarizing, text summarizing, analyzing code, etc. Similarly, it can also, in some cases, it might be able to do something more visual as well. But depending on what kind of pre-trained model you have and what kind of fine-tuning you do, you can apply the same pre-trained model to a whole range of different tasks, and then you don't need to pre-train the model for specific tasks. That is the idea of foundation model. And later, when we talk about AI for agriculture, we will also come across this. There is interest in building foundation models for agriculture, and then there are some challenges there. Okay, so let's move on to the third part of the lecture. So AI for agriculture, I will try to spend a little bit more time on this one. And then if there is anything unclear, please do feel free to stop me. And if there's a possibility of asking questions, I don't know, the organizers can help me with that. Or again, keep your, if not, then keep your questions till the end. So this is contributed by my supervisor again. So as far back as 2000, so remote sensing is basically using sensors either in satellites or other tools like either they're like flying vehicles or drones or different kinds of tools. In them they have sensors to detect specific things that you can see on the ground. So with that, as far back as 2000, there was some like AI related work being done that address some of the like agriculture related issues, like for example figuring out vegetation density, and then like water deficit, and then different stresses affecting crop. So this was like happening. I think the lower left image is from India, so that they were creating an app to do the basically to show crop stress to farmers. And then now the other area that like was using AI significantly, this is from 2014, is like in plant phenotyping. So plants, they have genotype. If you have a little bit of genetics background, so they have genes determining something. So they have genotype, they have cultivars, different varieties, and then based on like the different environment they are grown in, so they express themselves differently. So this, and then specifically in agriculture, it's very common to breed plants to have specific phenotypic traits or specific physical traits. Like maybe, like for example, let's talk about wheat or rice or like any of the cereals, right? So in Nepal, it would be nice, for example, if the crop, like whether it's rice or wheat, to be very strong against wind maybe, right? Or it is resistant to drought, or maybe it is resistant to pests or diseases or some of these. So these phenotypic traits, like they are selected by doing experimental work in the lab. So this is called plant phenotyping. And then that, because this is done in a controlled environment, so you have on the lower left, you can see, I think this might be a picture from Wageningen National Plant Phenotyping Laboratory in Wageningen. It's not just of the university, it's the national lab in Netherlands. So you can see there are like plants there. These plants actually go around in a belt. They are monitored for every imaginable things. And then based on that, you can figure out how are they responding to different environmental factors. And then you can select, or you can basically breed for specific like plant phenotypic traits. So this is where AI was like successful as far back as 2014. So again, this one also from my supervisor. So you can see this one, I think the main task that they are showing here is counting leaves, right? So the leaf count is kind of an indication of how healthy the plant is. So that was what they are trying to do here. Now, looking in the broader picture, so like let's say not just what was happening in the past and what we want to be able to do in the future. So this is the general overview. So we have environmental factors like elevation, slope, that's part of the landscape. We have weather or climate, right? And then we have soil, and we have things, the remote sensing part is more like what you can observe through these different sensors, right? So this is not necessarily environment, but this is more of the, like how do you sense what is going on. Similarly, there is the second component, which is for management. And in management, there are like farm practices, which is like when do you plant, whether you apply fertilizer, how often do you apply fertilizer, whether you irrigate or not, how often you irrigate, and how much, of course. And then similarly, there is like crop calendar is related to planting, harvesting, yeah. And then the last one is it talks about historical yields. Again, this is more of a statistic than actual management. And we briefly talked about genotype or genetics in the previous slide. So there will be cultivars, phenotype, genotype. So phenotype is the observable thing, genotype is the genetic thing. Okay, so that's what it is. And then then with this, if you have data, input data for these different factors that are contributing to plant growth and development. So in order for AI to take off, so what we're saying is that we need data, we need computation power, And then we need the domain expertise coming from agriculture as well as machine learning domain. And then with that, we can apply AI and then do something with the agricultural data. And then the goal is to address the global challenges of food security, climate change, biodiversity loss, etc. Right? So this is a big, big challenge. And now, before I move on to the next one, so I would like to discuss a little bit about how the state of agricultural data is. So I did my PhD in agriculture. Then what I realized is that there is data for specific things that's based on availability, not necessarily based on the suitability for the task that you want, right? So for example, I was trying to predict crop yield or forecast crop yield ahead of the harvest date. Now, there might be, let's say, several factors affecting crop production or crop yield. Now, there is no targeted data collection that would be beneficial for estimating the end of season crop yield. There is no such thing. So you will only have, for example, statistics collected by different countries, their statistical offices. So those statistics are like based on some kind of surveys or sampling, and that is published, and that's about it. The rest of the data that you have has no direct relationship with crop yield forecasting itself. Of course, they can help do the task, but there is no targeted data collection for that specific thing. And then that means like, so the data that I used was environmental data like weather data, and then soil data, and then in terms of like in the previous, on the left hand side you see three different things, right? So we don't have anything on management. The best we have is kind of a vague sense of when the crop was planted and when it was harvested. And in terms of cultivars and the genotypes and stuff, also we have kind of like putting everything together. So therefore, so we don't have data that is like specific for a specific, like for one cultivar or for a specific, like let's say irrigated farms or specific like fertilization routine, all that. So that level of detail, we don't have them. So we have to work with whatever data is available, and then that data we can see if we can still forecast crop yields ahead of harvest and see how good we can do it. And then later I will give you a sneak peek of how we were able to do it. But at some point, there are other factors that affect yield, right? Like pests affect yield, diseases affect yield. Similarly, like how often you irrigate or not affects yield, whether like you model the irrigated farms separately versus irrigated and non-irrigated separately affects yield. And then similarly, whether you fertilize, how often you fertilize, these affects yield. So the data will be available at different, let's say, administrative levels, but the irrigation and fertilization usually happens at the farm level. So there is also a mismatch between at what spatial resolution or spatial scale you have the data, and at what spatial scale or resolution there are other interesting things that might be happening, and we have no data for that. So that's the current state of agriculture. The other agricultural data, the other part of it is sometimes even the data that I used for my PhD, like weather data, soil data, the yield statistics data, and some remote sensing indicators. So this information may be available consistently for multiple countries. Like in Europe, it is available in decent quality. That might not be the case for areas like Africa. So that's another part of it. And then again, you go across like different countries, they have different system of collecting statistics, they have different systems of like annotating the data. So they will be fragmented in terms of a data format, the data collection systems, data reporting, there might be missing data, there might be like the data they have might not have good quality, because sometimes if let's say the data was missing or entered incorrectly, so there is no sufficient quality checks to ensure that every single data point is valid, right? So this is where it is, like we're trying to do AI for agriculture. And moving on, there is another work that is being done currently as part of this food and agriculture organization of the UN. So this is from my colleague Rolf Knappen. So what they are trying to do now is they're trying to use LLMs. So that's like where like AI is taking off, and they're trying to see if it is useful for farmers. And there is this notion of farmer field schools, and where there will be farmers coming in, they want to basically interact with this LLM to figure out, like, get information about how to manage their farm, right? So this is the main idea for this. And then this one uses the idea of retrieval augmented generation. So the idea of retrieval augmented generation is mainly, so if you train a model, you also give signals to the model.
Sorry for the interruption.
Sound?
Mic sorry.
Okay. Okay. So hopefully this is good. Yeah. Let me raise a bit. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Jatin. Yeah. So the retrieval augmented generation is basically you make sure the model actually has support for whatever information it is providing, or whatever sequence of text it is generating. It is based on some references, some sources of information that are relevant for that particular question or for that particular task, right? So this is what it is. Now moving on. Now after this we are moving on to, this is more or less my PhD work. So some of you were here yesterday also, so I briefly went over the task of crop yield forecasting. And then I'll show you briefly about what you can do with machine learning or AI in crop yield forecasting, and then go from there. So the motivation for crop yield forecasting is that crop yield forecasts are useful for, mainly the level I was working at is useful for policymakers and people who trade agricultural goods, right? So because if you know ahead of time what the crop production or crop yield will be in specific areas, it affects the prices of these agricultural production in that area. So because of that, if you produce ahead of time forecasts, then you can plan for shortages in certain areas, surpluses in other areas. So based on that, there will be price fluctuations, and then you can adjust your decisions based on that. So that's, and then in Europe, so there are other motivations that you can see here. So Europe produces around 20% of world wheat, and then out of that, 30% of the wheat that is produced in Europe is exported. So if there is less production, if there is going to be a shortage, that affects wherever this agricultural production is going, right? So this is the reason why we have if there is a failure, or there is a shortage of production, it affects not just markets but food security as well. Now this is part of the work from my PhD. So the main idea here I'm trying to show is that in Europe, the current state of the art before I used machine learning was that they would use statistical regression, like linear regression or multiple linear regression, to forecast crop yields at the level of the country, like France, Germany, Netherlands. They will have one forecast for each of the country. So there is no information within the country. It's just one forecast every year for each of the countries. Now that information, it can be useful, but then there's a lot of information lost as well, because as you go to bigger areas like a big country, a lot of the things that can affect crop yield are averaged out. So you don't really see kind of the useful information there. So here what I'm trying to show you is, so if you go into more finer spatial resolution, like we are doing it at the level of different administrative units. So you can see that in France and Romania, the administrative units are roughly about the same size, but if you go to Germany, they are smaller than that. But this is because of the way they are divided within each country. So if you go to these smaller spatial resolution, then there is a lot more variability than what you observe at the country level. And maybe I don't have that slide here, but so what I noticed is that, for example, in the case of Spain, which is not highlighted here, so in the case of Spain, if you just look at country level, And if you look at the machine learning predictions at the country level, so you can get as good as like 5% error. Then it looks like, okay, so if you can get 5% error, that looks like pretty good, right? So 5% error is quite small error, right? So prediction error is 5%. Then when you look at these units in Spain, so when you go to the higher resolution, then you'll realize there's a lot of red colors. So okay, so maybe I need to take that back, because the color scheme here versus the color there was like different. So what I mean is, if you look at the smaller units, higher resolution, you will notice a lot of smaller units having very high error rates, like let's say 25%, 30%, 40%. So that is the difficulty that we try to address with machine learning. With country level predictions, you cannot really see what is going on in the smaller units, administrative units in the country. So with machine learning, we're at least able to show that machine learning might not do like great in every single like spatial unit in the country, but it gives you an idea where things can be like the yields can be low, similarly where the errors can be high, right? So both of these information can be obtained from the machine learning methods. And the other work that I did was like, so I mentioned that the data is collected at a specific administrative level, right? So these yield statistics are collected at a specific administrative unit. Like in the United States, they're collected at a level called counties. Similarly, you saw in the previous slide, so here you can see, so these levels, in the case of France, Italy, Germany, and Romania, Hungary, so the level is called NOTS level 3, which is roughly like districts, or in France they call it department, but anyway, roughly like districts. And then in the case of Netherlands and in the case of Poland, they're roughly like provinces. So they're collected at a specific spatial level. Now that's where you have the labels. Now you're kind of forced to make, your machine learning models work at those spatial levels. Now what if we would like to have forecasts at a higher resolution than that? Can we really do that? Now what we tried is that there is this notion of weak supervision. Weak supervision is basically, you can supervise with labels at a very coarse or low resolution, but you can still produce forecasts at a higher resolution. So in this case, we did in two places. We did it in Europe. Like in Europe, of the countries that you saw here, like France, Romania, Hungary, Germany, and then Italy, and then there was also Spain. So these countries, you have data at NOTS 3. NOTS level 3 is the higher spatial resolution. And what if we were to take the yield statistics for NOTS level 2, which is a little bit lower spatial resolution? They are the bigger administrative units that might contain 4 or 5, the smaller NOTS level 3 units, right? So if we were to train a deep learning model that learns to predict for NOTS level 3 or the smaller spatial units, higher resolution units, by using labels from bigger low resolution units. That's what we did with weak supervision. And then in the United States, the labels are available at the county level, and we were able to predict crop yields at the 10-kilometer grid level. So this is what we managed to do with weak supervision. The idea is the input data, like weather data, remote sensing data, soil data, we actually have it at the high resolution. We have it at the 10-kilometer grid, or we have it at the smallest unit level that we want to predict. But the labels are still available at whatever spatial unit they're available, right? So then the model is going to predict at the high resolution. Now we need to figure out, how do we go from the high resolution forecast, aggregate that forecast somehow, and get to the low resolution, and then calculate the loss there, right? So because we have labels there. So that aggregation, we do it with something called crop area fraction. So we say that the weight assigned to each of the high resolution unit that we want to aggregate based on. So it is a weighted aggregation. It's not a simple average, it's a weighted average. So the weighted average is calculated based on the crop area fraction for that high resolution unit. So this is what we managed to do. So this is also a published paper. So yeah, if you're interested, there is a paper called A Weakly Supervised Framework for Crop Yield Forecasting. So that I can share with you later as well. Okay, so that was about my PhDs. Now I'm going to slowly move towards what I did as part of my postdoc research. Now, in my PhD, I managed to do some machine learning for crop yield forecasting in Europe and a little bit of work in the United States. Now, it's good to be able to show some things for, let's say, 10 countries or 5 countries. But then, does it really work across the globe? So that was the question we wanted to answer with this group called AgML. So AgML means machine learning for agricultural modeling. And AgML is part of a bigger community around the world called AgMIP. AgMIP is Agricultural Model Intercomparison Project. So the links are there. You can have a look there. And then the AgML group was started partly by our Wageningen AI group and partly by some people from NASA and some people from UFZ in Germany. So this group is one of the AgMIP groups that wants to investigate how machine learning and AI can help agriculture. So it was started right around the time I finished my PhD, so I started working on this after finishing my PhD. And what did we want to do with AgML? So I will focus mostly on the lower part first, the lower part of the figure first, and then we will briefly talk about the upper half, just to explain what I mean there. So the lower half is mainly saying that, so I talked about fragmentation or like different formats, different spatial scales of agricultural data, right? So the data comes in all kinds of different formats, all kinds of different spatial resolutions, and then if anyone was to like have access to this agricultural data, in order for them to take the data and go do machine learning or AI with it, it's not straightforward, right? So even if they were to figure it out, in order to compare it with something that's out there and say, okay, so this works great or doesn't work great, so there is a shortage of benchmarks, there is a shortage of like guidelines or best practices to go from the data to actually machine learning models and then the crop yield forecast or whatever predictions you're trying to do. So with AgML, what we wanted to do is we wanted to bring the agricultural modeling expertise from, let's say, the AgMIP group. Right? So the AgMIP is generally more on the side of agricultural modeling and climate impact modeling. And we, as a team of AI, similarly other researchers who were more on the kind of AI expertise. So we wanted to bring the two expertise together and prepare some guidelines for how would you go from, let's say, global data in the form of rasters, like there is, let's say, weather data, there is remote sensing data, there is soil data. How do you go from that data? What decisions you need to make? What choices you need to make? What are the alternatives? And what, like, let's say, why are we settling for one specific choice, right? We need to justify, right? So that part was done as part of a benchmark data set we created, so we'll talk about in the next few slides. So there's a lot of decisions to be made, that's the point. So those decisions, anybody who is coming into the field cannot make it on their own. So that's why we need the guidelines, and we need to make decisions and then justify why one is a better decision than other. So this is what we wanted to do. And then finally, produce benchmark data sets against which you can run AI or machine learning models and compare performance and then drive future research, right? That was the goal. And then, of course, if possible, there is the part of, I mean, if you could include what the end users of the models are, the stakeholders, and if their needs, their like requirements could be included in the data collection process or in the all the different data sources selection, all the different choices you make during modeling, that would be another nice thing to have. But at the moment, we have not been able to get to the stakeholder engagement part, but we worked more on the middle box, which is the benchmark, right? And The part on the top where I talk about crop modeling, remote sensing, and machine learning. So this, I think, it will come up again when I talk in the future, like the road ahead, where we talk about hybrid modeling. So the traditional crop modeling and machine learning come together to do something called hybrid modeling. I will talk about that there. Okay, so I talk about the benchmark, so it's called CY Bench, crop yield benchmark, and we produce this within the AgML group. And then where does it come from? So it comes from partly from my PhD research, so that's the left-hand side, so it's my PhD thesis. And then that's also where, like, we did crop yield forecasting mostly in Europe, a little bit in the US. From that, we started to take it one level further. There is a public GitHub repository where the SciBench is like there. You can contribute to it if you're interested, or just go and get the data and run the benchmark, and then try to build your own model and see if you can do better than the current benchmark. And what does the benchmark cover? So this is the one. So you can see it covers most of the major crop growing areas of the world. So this is for maize. You can see the yellow dots on the screen. They are representing where the crop is grown. This is the crop areas. And then the green countries are where we have data for. So if you see closely, so there are a few countries here and there, like Ukraine is missing, a couple of countries in Africa are missing, but in general we have a decent amount of coverage of the major crop growing countries of the world. That's like 38 countries for maize and 29 countries for wheat. And then the other part of this SciBench is that our goal is, let's say, for example, most of you here are from Nepal. What if you want to be able to extend this benchmark to Nepal, right? So we want to make sure that this is possible. The input data, like weather, remote sensing, soil, they are global. So they are available for every single country. So there, all you need to do is you need to also do a processing for Nepal. The data is already there. You just need to aggregate it to, let's say, district level in Nepal or any other administrative level in Nepal. And then in terms of the labels or the yield statistics, so assuming you are able to access some of these statistics through whichever institution in Nepal, let's say NARC or some Ministry of Agriculture, you have access to that data for Nepal. As soon as you have the yield statistics for Nepal at certain admin level, you should be able to produce the input data as well, and then you should be able to run the benchmark for Nepal. That was the idea. So therefore, we are not restricted by the input data. We're only restricted by whether you have yield statistics for that country or not. So that applies to any other country as well. Yeah. And so this one is for wheat. So here also you can see most of the countries are covered, except some of the East European countries. Yeah. And then Turkey, it seems to be also there. Now, what is included in SciBench? So this is, again, I think I have talked about this mostly already. So weather variables, there is temperature average, minimum, maximum. There's precipitation or rainfall, and there is radiation. And there is something called evapotranspiration. It's a kind of measure of evaporation and transpiration from the plants. And there is something called climatic water balance. The climatic water balance is how much rain you got. From that, you subtract out how much the plant let it go out to the atmosphere again through evapotranspiration. And there are some indicators of soil moisture, surface soil moisture and root zone soil moisture. So both of them are indicating how much moisture is in the plant has access to. And there are two remote sensing based vegetation health or vegetation biomass indicators. They're called FPAR and NDVI. So both of them are kind of similar. I mean, generally one is sufficient, but we have included both. So if it should be possible to model with one or both. And they're basically showing how green or like how healthy the plant is as seen from satellites. There are some static soil properties, like the first one is available water holding capacity or available water capacity, how much the soil, water the soil can hold. And there's bulk density of the soil particles. And then drainage class is basically saying how much It's a categorical variable. How much the water in the soil will drain, right? So that's what it is. And then there are two other auxiliary data that we use. Now let me see if it is, there is, no. So this one, yeah, so the auxiliary data, how is it used is basically, you have input data that's global. So let's say you can imagine a raster of data that covers the whole globe. Now, if you want to prepare the data for a specific crop in a specific country, what you need to do is, first you need to mask the global data by the area where there is that crop, right? So you noticed in the previous, here you can see there is a crop mask. The yellow dots are the crop mask. So you need to select only the parts of the country or part of the region that includes that crop. So that is the part that you need for crop masking. And then the second thing that you need to do, now you have selected, for example, let's say we are looking at India, then we will have first masked the parts of India that have the yellow dots. And the next thing would be, in India, the data is at district level. So then we would aggregate the global data to the district level boundaries. So that's what the processing required to produce Science data. Now, this is an overview of what the data, like more details of the data looks like. Mainly, I would like to ask you to look at the columns where there are bars, right? So that gives you an indication of how many years are covered, and then like how many data points there are. It's very hard to see exactly how many data points there are, but like for example, if you were to see, I don't know, maybe you cannot read it. So there is Mexico, which has 4 bars on the right hand side. So Mexico has 4 bars. So that represents it has data only for 4 years and not a lot of data. So therefore, if you go global, the main challenge is the data is going to be, some data sets are going to be very small. So if you were to build machine learning models, they might work great in the United States. If you go to Mexico or if you go to some countries in Africa, and even some countries in Europe also have quite small data set actually, like Denmark, Sweden. So then there, the question is like, do the models work there as well? So that is the challenge there. So can we make machine learning models work well in the small data scenario? So that's one of the main challenges. The other main challenge will be covered in the road ahead as well is, it's great when you can predict with 5% error when it's the normal or the average season, right? So nothing strange happened. The temperatures were kind of the average. The rainfall was kind of the average. Planting and harvesting kind of happened as expected. And then like no frost, no hailstones or whatever, right? So in that case, it's easy to come up with a model that predicts with pretty good accuracy. But what if there was a drought? What if there was a heat wave? What if there was like extreme rainfall at the wrong time of the season? Like basically either like waterlogging or like basically affecting plant in ways that you did not expect, right? So that is the biggest challenge in the crop yield forecasting. Moving on in terms of the models that are included in the benchmark. So there are a couple of very naive baselines. So like in a particular administrative region, you can predict the average. And that actually is a pretty good prediction actually. So it's not easy to beat the average in many cases, when especially the data set is small. Similarly, you can also predict based on what was the trend from the last 5 years or something. And then there are a bunch of scikit-learn based models that require expertise-based feature design. And there are a bunch of neural network based models. That's what is included. Now, how do we evaluate performance? So, because some of the data sets are quite small, it is important to evaluate for every single year. This is what I'm trying to show here. So every single year, so there's a leave 1 year out evaluation. Okay, so with that, I've come to the end of third part. Now let's look at the road ahead, the areas for future research. Now in the slide on AgML, so there was one place where I had written that crop modeling, machine learning, and remote sensing are coming together. So this is also a place where this can come. So it's basically, it's called knowledge-guided machine learning, or physics-informed machine learning, or hybrid modeling. So there are bunch of different names, all referring to how do you make sure that the machine learning models are actually, they also take into account what the domain, like the information known by domain experts, right? So this is what we're trying to do. And here, there is a big community of crop modeling and similar like theory-driven modelers. Like for example, AgMIP, almost entirely, AgMIP, the community that does model intercomparison around the world, they're almost completely theory-driven. And my PhD is almost completely data-driven. Not completely, but almost. And so the process-based ones, they run experiments, they run trials in like basically controlled fields, and then they observe how certain factors, environmental or otherwise, genetic, environmental, management factors affect the plant or the plant yield or the crop production, right? So based on that, they have determined relationship between, for example, temperature and some plant, let's say, whether it's leaf area, whether it's like when it flowers, when the crop starts filling grains, and how much crop is produced at the end. So all of these relationships, all of these processes, they have been kind of like investigated in a controlled environment using these trials and experiments. So based on that, those relationships established in these experimental settings, people develop models. These are process-based models in that sense, right? So they have like rate of change. When something like input changes, what is the rate of change of some state, some interesting output that we care about? So there is like rate of change equations, and there are like different state variables, like leaf area, and then yield biomass, and then similarly the grain or the storage organ biomass. So these things, they have been established by experiments, and based on that they can run process-based models on a daily time step. So they have indication of when the crop is planted, and then daily they will have an indication of what was the temperature like, what was humidity like, what was rainfall like, what was evapotranspiration like, and based on that the model will step through, and at the end of the day it will indicate what will happen to the plant. So this is a daily time step crop models. And one of the crop models that comes out of Wageningen was used in my PhD research also. So my PhD was not completely data-driven, so I used some of the crop model knowledge as well. So it was a little bit of hybrid modeling. And then there is the data-driven machine learning. So Science at the moment, we don't include any crop modeling or like domain knowledge specific things in it. So if you were to just run Science with the models we have, it's almost completely data-driven. The only place where we try to bring in a little bit of domain knowledge is in the scikit-learn models, where there is expertise-based feature design. So when any expertise-based feature design, you can bring in, based on your knowledge of the domain, how do you design the features, right? So that's what we do. Now, the goal of hybrid modeling is to figure out how to combine the strengths of the theory-driven models, or how to combine domain knowledge in different form with data-driven learning, right? And then, so this is in terms of like the previous team I was part of. So this is one of the main research direction that we're trying to take. So there are few different ways you can do this. So one of them is, for example, our focus is on the machine learning side. How do we make the machine learning models better with information that can be obtained from the crop modeling work, right? So even in my PhD research, I did two things that come from the crop modeling work. So one of them is, whenever you are designing features, it's better to design features based on what stage the crop is at. Like in my work, So we defined 6 different periods in the growing season of the crop. So there is the pre-planting period, there is the planting or emergence period, that's when the seedling will come out of the ground. There is the vegetative period where the plant will grow leaves and grow tall. There is the flowering period, and after flowering there is the grain feeling or basically fruiting period, and then finally there is the harvest period. So these are different periods, and different plants go through these different periods in different ways, right? So this is called phenology transition, or like these are called phenological stages. So if we can figure out based on crop modeling principles or even outputs from crop models, so when did this crop go from one stage to another stage? And you design the features, whether it's taking the average of the temperature or max of the temperature or average of the rainfall or something, whatever feature you're designing, if you're designing for these different periods, then it's a better design than just saying weekly or monthly aggregates, right? That's one of the things that we did. And then the other part of the thing that we did is that now each of these 6 different periods, for example, like whether it's like vegetative or flowering or fruiting or harvest, so there is already established knowledge that plant responds to different factors from the environment differently in these different periods. That means, for example, in the emergence period, plant requires moisture, but it doesn't require very high temperature. Similarly, in the case of flowering, the plant will be affected most if there is a really high temperature, like if there is a heat wave or drought, the plant will be affected. So in this way, different periods of the crop growth and development, there are different factors or different variables that are important. So that information we put it into the model, like especially the feature design part of it. So that's how we did some hybrid modeling. So that's the ML-centric part of it, right? So that ML-centric can also include, so if you run the crop model will provide you information about leaf area, information about, based on that crop model, what will be the yield biomass. So this information can itself be passed to machine learning, and machine learning can do better if this crop model simulated information is included in the variables passed to machine learning or deep learning model. So that is the ML-centric one. And then the second one, the process-centric one, is how do we improve the crop model itself by putting in components that leverage machine learning. So process-based models, major difficulties with process-based models are they have parameters, similar to machine learning models, they have parameters, and it is very difficult to get good parameter values for the crop models as well. In the case of machine learning, you do gradient descent or something different, like algorithms that will help you slowly fine-tune your estimate of the parameters. Process-based models, they don't do gradient-based learning. So it is very difficult to estimate these parameters. So this is where machine learning could come in. If you could make it, the field is called differentiable programming or differentiable learning. So if you could make a crop model differentiable, then we could also learn the parameters of the crop model through the differentiable learning paradigm, right? So that is one of the things that we can do, or we can do it for not the whole crop model, but we can only do specific parts of the crop model. Crop model will include, for example, water balance model. It might include phenology transition model. It might include the partition of like how the energy coming from the sun is partitioned into different parts of the plant, like root, shoot, leaves, etc. Right? So these different parts of the model can be, depending on which one is the one that is not defined very well, we can try to explore where machine learning can improve that. And then both of these, this slide and the next one is coming from my colleague Michal. And then this one is about RL. So you learned about RL yesterday, reinforcement learning. And reinforcement learning is very common in agriculture, specifically around the topic of precision agriculture. So the idea of precision agriculture is, this is done at farm level. So you have a farm, you have a field, so you want to monitor what's going on in that field. Like, let's say you want to know what is the state of soil nutrients. You want to know how much nitrogen you want to put in there or other nutrients you want to put in there. You want to know what is the state of moisture, soil moisture there. You want to know how much irrigation to do there. And you also want to know, if you take your this combined harvester and then go around the field, then you will get an estimate of like how much was harvested, how much yield was there in different parts of the field. You will get a sense of like some parts of the field have bigger, higher harvest, some parts of the field have lower harvest. And if you try to combine information from, let's say, soil nutrients, water shortage, etc., and the actual yield, you might get signals for, okay, should we add more nutrients in this part of the field, or should we add more water, or should we make the soil a little bit loose by doing some farm practices? What is it that is required to improve the yield in that part of the farm, right? So this whole thing can be done using sensors checking what the moisture is like, sensors checking what the concentration of nutrients is like. So precision agriculture is where RL is needed, because the goal is here, you need to learn a policy to apply soil nutrients or water, right? So these things to improve the production from that farm. And then based on what you heard yesterday, I hope it should be like kind of clear to you, like there is state is the environment, including the plant, and then like sunshine, rainfall, temperature, etc. The action to be needed is depending on whether you're trying to do it for fertilization or irrigation. The action is whether to fertilize or not fertilize, whether to irrigate or not irrigate, and how much to put in and when, right? So how often. So during the course of the season, you can have a policy that says fertilize 5 times, 20 kg each time, or all the variations of it, right? So that this is also again work done by Mihail and group. So there is a product or like there is a it's publicly available called CropGym. So you can do cropgym.ai. You should be able to see, and if not, yeah. So and then I think the more latest one is it's also available through the GitHub of the AI group in Wageningen as well. So I will. I think yesterday I shared with you the GitHub repository of Science and the work that I did. If you go to the Wood AI organization, you will see the one for CropGym as well. So this is reinforcement learning. Now, the part about crop modeling that is not explained here is that now, in order to figure out what your reward is in this case, like in the case of the RL agent, so if you cannot really go out in the field and do these like actions every time and try to figure out what is the reward, right? So you cannot just play like the RL agent goes to the field, applies this amount of nitrogen, waits for the end of the season, and then figure out, oh, the yield is this much. One, it's going to be very slow because you only have the yield measurements at the end of the season, and then you can do it again next season, so it's going to be slow. Second, it's experimental. The farmer or like anybody who has the field trying to do precision agriculture, they might not be willing to give you, multiple fields to do these experiments, right? So how do you solve the problem of being able to try this out and then learn, right? So this is done with the help of the crop model simulation. So with the crop model, you can feed in the weather, you can feed in the soil, and you can feed in the action of the RL agent. And based on that, you can get an idea what would be the yield, right? So this is how the RL agent is trained in case of CropGym. Now the other dimension of other area of like active research is this is in general called explainable AI or interpretable ML, right? So in the case of agriculture, the model forecasts or model outputs are to be used by policymakers or basically in general by people. So they will ask you, why should I trust this model? Yeah, and in that case, then you need to be able to come up with a way to explain how the model works and then whether what the model is saying is actually reasonable or not. So this is the slide is basically saying that the vanilla machine learning approach would be, yeah, you give me data, I give you a prediction, and then the accuracy is reasonably good. So based on performance metrics, you're doing pretty well. Then that's sufficient for maybe some applications. In some applications, then you need to explain and say, this is the prediction for these reasons, right? So this is also quite common nowadays with images as well as text. So highlighting the parts of the image or part of the text sequence that was used to come up with the prediction. And in general, the idea of interpretable ML and explainable AI in agriculture is very crucial because, like for example, when I started my PhD, the data came from this European Commission's Joint Research Center. And I mentioned that they do simple statistical linear regression. So simple statistical linear regression models, they are very explainable, right? So any linear regression models, the weights kind of correspond to what is the importance of that particular variable or factor. When you do machine learning, can you still predict how these different factors are coming up with the forecast? So that is the hard part. So we did write one paper where we went and asked these Joint Research Center scientists, so please tell us how these different input factors affect the crop yield in different stages of the crop growth, like the pre-planting, planting, vegetative, flowering, etc. So this was a survey. So they fill in, okay, so how important is something, and whether it's important in the sense it has a positive impact, it has a negative impact, whether it's a small impact, whether it's a big impact. So in that sense, we made a scale. We asked them to fill in their domain knowledge. What is the expected impact of different factors during different parts of the season? Then we ran the deep learning model. Deep learning model, we passed it after we have the deep learning model forecast. Then we also ran feature attribution methods. So feature attribution methods are very common ways to try to explain what a model is learning. So feature attribution models methods will tell you which part of the input was very important in coming up with that particular forecast, right? So that then, in that sense, then we produce these plots of which different variables were important in different stages of the plant growth. Again, so we have the expert opinion and we have the model-based explanation of what was important in different parts of the season. And we try to compare them, their agreement, and based on that we try to assess interpretability or explainability, right? Now there is a problem here, which is, one, experts don't always agree, that's one. Second, even if they were to agree in some ways, they might also not be consistent. Like when we took the survey, they might take the survey in a certain way. If we ask them again after 3 months, their response to that survey might be slightly different. So this consistency and agreement between experts is not guaranteed. And on the other side, the model might not be very accurate. So if it is not accurate, whatever way we're trying to explain the model might not tell us a lot. Like for example, in our own paper, we had 2 different crops. The crop for wheat, the model was very good, meaning the accuracy or percentage error was quite low. Accuracy was good. So in that case, the explanation provided by the model also was like agreeing more with the experts. So that is expected. But if the model performance is quite bad, then explaining the model itself is also not going to help you much. Therefore, this area of explainable AI or interpretable interpretable ML, the major difficulty here is how do you decide the interpretation or explanation that you produce is actually any good, whether it's something that you can rely on. So that's one of the major area of like research, figuring out how to judge or how to assess the goodness of the explanation or interpretation itself. Now this brings us to the other approach to machine learning. Now what if we start with known causal relationships? So what if we start with a known causal relationship? So this is the idea of causal learning or causal ML. If you were to start with a causal graph, that tells you, okay, temperature affects this plant in this part of the season, right? So if you were to draw all of that causal graph, then you can do, there is this, the book of why, or there are like several papers coming out now about causal machine learning as well, which there are a bunch of techniques out there which will help you estimate the effect of each of the different factors on the outcome, which is in our case crop yield, for example, right? So this causal machine learning is one paradigm which has not been explored a lot in agriculture, but this is being picked up slowly. Like even in AgML, we tried to have a team doing causal ML. That is, it hasn't taken off yet. But anyway, the idea is to be able to first even learn. There are two parts to it. One is called discovery, learning the different edges in the causal graph, that's one. Second one is if you were to know the edges in the causal graph, figuring out how a specific factor in the causal graph affects the outcome, which is the yield. Yeah. And the other one that I mentioned briefly earlier in the talk was about capturing climate extremes, right? So it is, of course, I mean, nice to be able to have machine learning models with small errors or high accuracy, but do they do good when it comes to the seasons with extreme weather, right? Like whether it's heat wave or drought. So this is, on the left-hand side, the figure is coming from my own work. So there you can see, this is from 2016 in France. So there was a loss of yield there. Wheat yield was like not completely explained yet. So this is where machine learning models will typically fail, because they can capture the pattern, which is the general pattern, the more average pattern, but the extreme pattern they don't capture as well. And if you look at the maps of France, the one in the middle at the top, that was the observed or reported yield for that year. If you look at all the other models there, some of them are based on the trend, some of them are based on machine learning, LSTM, right? So all of them are quite bad. The one closest to the reported statistic is the one right below the reported values, right? So that one is not using the yield trend. It is only using the observed weather for that year. So it seems there is some relation between weather, whatever happened to the weather on that season, and the yields reported for that. So that's that. And then the other one that on the right-hand side, that is mostly about in the future, because of climate change, the occurrences of heat waves or climate extremes are likely to increase. So therefore, building models that are robust enough to predict these extreme yield losses is going to be crucial. I think that is the last slide. Now this I briefly touched about in the AgML slide, is that so far what we've been doing is there is data, and then we have some machine learning expertise. We try to build all the different kinds of machine learning models we can. We check what is the accuracy of the model, and then because the accuracy of the model might be good or so, and then we go in, try to present it to somebody, like including, let's say, people who have done this before. They might be researchers or some other stakeholders, right? When we go there, they will try to ask questions about how is this useful, or can you explain how this works, and all of that. So that's where now the machine learning model might not always do good. Like we might be able to show, okay, the percentage error is 10%, but we might not always be able to explain how it achieves that. Or we might not be able to explain how this model is useful to the particular end user. So this is where it would be crucial to bring in the input from the stakeholders from the start. And then in the beginning of the talk, I also mentioned that data is not necessarily collected for a specific task in mind. So maybe it is not going to be possible for everything that we can think of, but for specific per specific task and for like areas where we have control over what data is collected, it might make sense again to go and talk to the stakeholders, say what data collection is useful for the task that we have in mind. So that's why it would be good to involve the stakeholders in data collection, in the task that we are trying to solve, and then also in the evaluation and interpretability assessment. So that is basically the talk. Yeah, so I will stop here, and then yeah, I would be happy to take any question. So I think there is a further slide with contact information for the colleagues from Wageningen mostly, and then there is Ashok from University of Twente. So I'll now open it for questions. Thank you very much.
Do you have any questions? Can you please raise your hand?
Hello, a great overview over the whole field. I have a question. I'm trying to think if we can apply some of the learnings from how foundational models impacted tech, language, and then vision to this problem. And so I noticed that there's lots of data available globally that you use as the input, and some of the data you mentioned are vegetation, which is sort of a derived variable, right? That's maybe more like an output than an input.
Yep.
And so I was wondering if it would be possible to train a model, pre-train a model of this huge data set that is able to predict vegetation based on all the other variables in the past.
Yep.
And once you have a model that is able to do that, maybe the little label data is sufficient to fine-tune it for any of the other tasks, and if people are looking into that, or...
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, so I thought I had that in my slides, apparently not. Yeah, there is interest in foundation model kind of things for agriculture. So now, nobody has figured this out yet, but based on my experience is that if you look for like large amounts of data, there's plenty of data from remote sensing. Similarly, the weather data is available from like as far back as you want to go, right? Let's say 1950 or so also. So for pre-training, so the main part that we need to figure out is during pre-training, what is the supervision signal that you're going to provide to the model? Like it doesn't need to be yield itself, that's fine. So we may not have the yield statistics at the same spatial resolution or for that time period. But then we might still be able to provide some kind of supervision with something like things that you can see from the satellites. So with that, my understanding is that the best continuous kind of satellite product we have is the MODIS one. And then there is, in our Science data set also, we include the FPAR data, which is coming from MODIS. And I think the NDVI also comes from the same, anyway. So I think there is potential for training. It can be globally as well, training a model with the remote sensing data. And there can also be training, and then the kind of the label, or let's say pseudo label we would use would be something like NDVI or FPAR. With that pre-training, and I don't know if this is another question we did not answer in Science is, does it really make sense to train globally? Or is there like a way to identify different domains in the world which are similar in terms of agroecology, right? So these are the two things that we need to address, then we can do the foundation models part. Because fine-tuning part is the easier part, because after you have the pre-training, then you go to specific country or specific region, fine-tune with the labels available there. But the setting up of the pre-training part is the difficult part. So both the two questions, once we answer them, I think we can do it. Thank you.
Okay, any questions, guys?
Hello sir, namaste.
Namaste.
My name is Dilli and I did my master's and master's in agriculture.
Yeah.
But as you know that data science and remote sensing is not that common in Nepal, especially in our field.
Yeah.
So I have been practicing the learning of remote sensing like from 2020, and You have mentioned about different remote sensing initiatives in your research. So I just wanted to know that, like, did you focus more on the remote sensing or field-based data? Because I have seen a lot of papers, they are training their model in Google or TView,
Yeah.
using the remote sensing data, and maybe just collecting few data for the validation only. But as per your presentation, I thought you use more of the ground data and less of the remote sensing data. So like in country like Nepal, where we have a lot of microclimate, how can we integrate remote sensing data, especially because we have a very small land holding and
Yeah.
even in that land holding, a lot of are used in the build up and farm, I mean animal farm or setup, whatever. So how can we integrate the remote sensing data in a very small land holding, like in country like Nepal, and train our model ethic based. So what do you think on this aspect?
Okay, yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so this is kind of related to why I did not pursue this research, especially because I was interested in how much this research can contribute to agriculture in the mountain areas of Nepal, right? So I briefly said that I was interested in it, and I wanted to consider if research would get me there, right? So two things I would like to answer. One of the question is that you raised is whether I used remote sensing in my PhD research. So I did not do any processing of remote sensing data myself, but there is a remote sensing indicator called FPAR or FAPAR. So this is basically like a vegetation index that shows plant health, right, or plant growth, like greenness or something, right? So this is kind of indicator that has already been processed from satellite images, and now it's a time series of numbers. So this is what I use in my PhD. And then in terms of the labels, they are sort of field-based because they are, I think, based on some kind of sampling and survey. So they are statistics published by countries, right? So that's what it is. So I did not do based on remote sensing. So that's the answer to that. Second one, in Nepal, I was interested in two things. One thing is about these landslide and related hazards. So there's good amount of potential with what we can do with remote sensing. And the other one was related to food security. So both of those, I try to write proposals and then like have some ideas that would work. Now going into, for example, for landslide hazards, so we have sentinel data, which is pretty high resolution remote sensing, right? So with that, it should be possible for us to detect where landslides are. So the detection of landslides should be possible. This is what we wrote with Ashok from University of Twente as well. We can also probably with AI, machine learning, we can do automatic detection of landslide occurrences and updating the inventory of landslides every year. That's what I can see is possible. Of course, it's not going to be 100% accurate because of the steepness of our slopes, etc. Maybe we will need to use SAR instead of optical remote sensing, right? So these things. But there is potential there. Now, we might be able to detect. Detecting is not sufficient. We might also want to forecast or predict a bit. So that is the hard part. Because unlike crop yield forecasting, where labels are there, but label data is usually not that big. In the case of landslide hazard modeling, the opposite is true. The inventory or the landslide occurrences, you might even use AI and produce these labels on your own. The input data, the predictor data is the one harder to find because you will need what is the current state of soil, vegetation, etc. on the ground. You cannot rely on those factors completely by remote sensing. You cannot predict landslides and hazards purely based on what you can see from the satellite. So that's the answer to that. Second one is about food security and stuff. The main thing here is like you already mentioned smallholder farms, right? Small holdings. So that makes it very difficult for us to actually do anything in AI at the moment, just with remote sensing related products. But I would say, so what we need is in general, even if you were to do something with remote sensing, at the end of the day, you need some kind of ground validation, right? So the answer to all of this is there is a there is an idea floated around Commonwealth countries called National Agricultural Data Infrastructure. So that's what we need in Nepal also. We need this data infrastructure to be in place. The infrastructure would track, for example, what is the crop type, when is the crop planted, when is it harvested, what is the production, right? And then out of that, what is the, let's say, amount that is needed for food security, and whether the amount produced every season is actually meeting the food security standard or not. That kind of data infrastructure is needed if we were to be able to monitor food security situation in Nepal. Hopefully that answers your question.
Guys, any more questions? Can you raise your hand? Okay, come on.
First of all, thank you for the great lecture, sir. My question is, in case of a disease detection in plants, how can we gather a data set, especially the images data set, and label them in context of Nepal? And what are the differences is there in comparison to the other developed countries in data set gathering? And also, are there any open source data for such cases, and it is feasible to collect and annotate them without any expert help?
Could you repeat the first part, please?
In case of disease detection in plants, how can we
disease, okay,
data sets, especially images one, and label them, and in context of especially in Nepal?
Okay.
And what are the differences of collecting data in comparison to other countries?
Okay, so in case of Nepal or otherwise, I think in this case, the best help is this citizen science idea, right? So anybody can take pictures of what's happening in their field. They can upload it somewhere. And then if this data repository or app has also some experts that I can actually help you with the labeling part, then whatever is visible, of course, the quality control of how the pictures are taken, whether something is visible or not, that is a part always there in citizen science situations, right? So you need to do a little bit of quality control or training for people to actually take pictures that are like clear and visible. After that, yeah, so if experts are included in the app users group, then they can do the labeling and hopefully we can go from there. Yeah, thank you.
Sir, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Chief. Thank you so much, Dilli sir. Now to honor his amazing lecture and his presence here at NIS 2024, can I please welcome on the stage Ms. Ayusha Shrestha, the project manager for this year annual Nepal AI School. And please provide him with a token of card.
Hello everyone, I am Dilli Paudel. I used to work as a postdoc in Wageningen University and Research, and before that I also did a PhD from the same place, applying machine learning to crop yield forecasting, or in general applying AI to agriculture. And my motivation for getting into this field is I am a computer scientist or software engineer by training, and then I wanted to see what we can do with these new technologies in agriculture, and in particular I wanted to see whether any of these could be applied in a country like Nepal.